Hello everyone, welcome back to Historical Geology 1404. Today is Lecture 8, the last lecture of Module 2. We'll be discussing evolution in the fossil record, kind of tying together the ideas that we've been discussing thus far in Module 2. What this means is that when we meet again on Monday, the day after Easter, happy Easter preemptively to everyone who celebrates, when we meet together on Monday, we will be doing our Exam 2 review. Okay? So please come prepared with questions to that class session. For my online students, please send me your questions no later than Sunday at midnight, let's say. Because if you put it off till Monday morning, I might not see it. It might not get to me before I start this review session. So please send me your review questions before Monday morning. Let's see. Besides that exam, you've gotten a bunch of labs, a bunch of discussion boards. I have gone through and graded everything. As of yesterday, like I promised on Monday I would, as of yesterday, everything is up to date and graded. If you got a 0 on anything other than an exam, well, no. Hold on, let me rephrase that. If you got a 0 on anything because you didn't attempt it, you can do it again. If you got a 0 on anything but an exam for any reason, you can do it again. If you have a 0 on an exam, it's most likely because you didn't take it. If you didn't take it, you still can. I highly recommend you do that because whatever points you get for taking a late exam is a heck of a lot better than 0 points for not having taken it at all, right? So please make sure you're keeping up with exams. Check your grade book. See if you've got 0s on anything. Something that will commonly happen on Blackboard, because Blackboard is just such a delightful service, is that you will attempt to submit something and it will not actually go through, and it will say draft saved. And unless you think to look for where it says draft saved, you'll think that you submitted it. But then you'll go in and say, oh, I've got a 0 on this. Why? I thought I turned it in. Draft saved. Try submitting it again. Okay? Just bear that in mind. Yeah. I think that's all I've got for announcements. Any questions or concerns or anything from the body of the class? Anyone have fun Easter weekend plans?
I just realized I don't think my family has any plans.
No plans? I am going camping Thursday night through Saturday around noon. I'm going to go to a ranch about an hour away out by Stanton. Just camp out for the weekend. Go hiking a little bit. Hi. Well, shall we begin then? All right. How many of you have heard of a gentleman named Charles Darwin? 1, 2, 3. Couple of y'all. What do you know about Charles Darwin?
It sounds familiar, but I don't know.
Charles Darwin sounds familiar. All right.
He's some author or something.
He's what?
Author, book, writer.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
He did write books, one of which you've probably heard of if you've in any way had anything to do with biology. Yes, he covered Darwinism. Actually, we call it Darwinism because he proposed that particular theory. We'll get to that in a moment. I heard someone else say something about, what? Did you say something?
Survival of the fittest?
Survival of the fittest. Okay, so now we're talking about what Darwin did. Darwin was a naturalist, remember that term, right? Who made some very, very, very good data-driven observations about the world, in particular about things that live in the world, in particular how they interact with each other, and how you can find patterns in certain organisms. that are relevant to other organisms in their ecosystem. Okay? So he went and traveled on a ship called the Beagle. And he went all around and he found a bunch of different things. And some of the cooler things he found we're going to talk about today. Okay? Some of his observations. Some of the questions he asked. Why are there certain animals that we can find in the Americas that you can't find in other places? Right? Why are there sloths in one part of the world but not everywhere? Why are there mountain lions here but not there? So on and so forth. Now, this comes in kind of two parts. He noticed that you don't find two species that are the same between the Americas and, say, Africa, but you do find patterns. You do find similar traits, though not exact traits. This is interesting. This is the topic we'll come back to later on. Let's finish our conversation about Darwin first, though. Okay? He went to some islands called the Galapagos Islands. You ever heard of the Galapagos Islands? It's a protected area now, chiefly because there's a lot of endangered species there, but also because Darwin went there and made some incredible observations that led to some prevalent theories we have today. But he noticed some things about the animals that live on the Galapagos Islands. Let's talk about the tortoises. He noticed that when you go island to island to island to island to island, there are tortoises on each island. But each island's tortoises are slightly different from each other. If you ever go to our pond here in town, the duck pond out by Prosperity Bank, the water level is really low right now. Okay, so you can actually go walking out on the lake bed. Okay, but if you throw some bread in the water, you're going to attract ducks, sure, but there's also going to be a bunch of turtles that come to you. If you ever manage to catch sight of their shells, you will notice that there are two species of turtles. I've noticed only two species of turtles there, okay? Red-eared sliders and ornate box turtles. The little guy I've got in my office is an ornate box turtle, okay? Their shells are very different from each other, as are a few other physiological traits, but their shells are the most obvious one that you will notice, okay? Box turtle shells tend to be boxier, taller in profile, have a few more ridges. Red-eared slider shells tend to be sleeker, shallower, making them easier for swimming in the water. Okay? Why? Both occupy the same ecosystem. Why do they have distinct differences? Well, in this case, there are two different species. Okay? Each species having adapted to a different set of criteria for surviving in the environment. Having undergone different random mutations. Different mutations that gave them advantages for survival. Okay? Well, even though these islands are so close to each other, their tortoise shells are very different. Some are taller, some are ridgier. Some of the tortoises have more vertical necks. Some of them have longer necks. Some of them have longer tails. Some of them have sharper claws. But he cataloged all of these differences. And it puzzled him. How can this happen? How do these populations of obviously the same animal be so different from each other? Before I give you the answer, let's talk about the other group. The finches. Darwin's finches. Something you may hear about later on if you continue through the world of science. Finches, as far as we can tell, are not classically native to the Galapagos Islands. They've been there for a long time, but the fossil record that we found thus far does not indicate that they have been there for an extremely long time. Okay? Maybe on the scale of hundreds of thousands of years, not millions. Okay? But the finches on each island have very distinctively different beaks and head shapes. All of them are finches. The best explanation that we have for this, and that Darwin theorized, is that at some point, a long time ago, a storm blew a flock of finches to the Galapagos Islands. Okay? This will happen all the time. Random flocks of birds will cross oceans because of a strong breeze that they can't fight. So they just ride it. Okay? So a storm brought these finches, a flock of finches, all of which looked the same at the time, the same species. Okay? It blew them to these islands. Now the finches would spread out island to island. Those aren't that far from each other, obviously, and they can fly. They're going to go and look at all the islands. But as time goes on, what all of these finches looked like starts to change. The finches on this island don't look like the ones on that island, don't look like the ones on that island, don't look like the ones on that island. Why? Why would a finch have a small, narrow beak or a giant, large beak? Any ideas? The beaks are honestly the biggest difference here that we're going to discuss. So why the beak difference? The type of things they're eating. What do you imagine is the prey, the ideal prey for a finch that has a long, narrow profile beak? Bugs. Exactly. It's going to be bugs. This finch can fly through the air faster, more aerodynamically than this one can. This is a beak designed for catching bugs in flight. This is a beak designed for crushing seeds, nuts, things like that. And why did they develop different types of beaks? Because of environmental stress. Namely, what if I had finches that went and settled on an island that didn't have a lot of seeds, but had a lot of bugs? What random mutation would be beneficial to that finch population? A mutation that caused you to have a narrower beak profile, so you can fly faster. Those that developed that mutation became more successful and passed that mutation on to other individuals through reproduction. Okay? Each successive generation, more and more of them got narrower beaks. What about on the island that didn't have very many bugs but had a lot of seeds? What about on the island with a lot of seeds? A mutation that caused an increase in the beak size and strength would be beneficial for crushing those seeds and getting them open so you can eat the yummy insides, right? Different random mutations were beneficial on different islands, even though they are so close to each other, right? And that's the same thing with the tortoises. Maybe the tortoises on one island swam more than the tortoises on another because there were more beaches. Maybe the tortoises on one island had to target brush that was growing higher off the ground, and therefore they developed a higher neck profile, a more vertical neck profile. Maybe a random mutation in a female tortoise one time made it prefer a male that had higher ridges on its shell. Things like this that influence the genetic success of a bloodline determine the success or the proliferation of those traits. And it really can just be something as simple as taste, right? Interesting question. Gentlemen, I'll start with the gentleman. Do you find blue eyes or brown eyes more attractive?
Brown eyes.
Brown eyes?
Brown or what?
Or blue? Blue?
Brown.
Brown? Brown? Okay, there's a lot of you that say brown. Ladies, do you find green eyes or brown eyes more attractive? What do you think? You don't know? Any preferences? No? I know it's hard to make a judgment like that off of something as superficial as eye color, but I have a point here, okay? Everyone has some sort of implicit preference for what they find attractive in a potential mate. We are not the only species that does that. For some species, it's a longer tail. For a lot of birds, it's the brightness of their plumage or the quality of their bird song. All species have some form of sexual preference based on individual desire, okay? It's often instinctual. In us, it's a choice. okay, to be fair, we probably do have some instinct implicit there, okay? But I'm not going to get into that kind of anthropological social interpretation here, okay? Stick to the science that I know. So, yeah, it is absolutely possible that a tortoise on a Galapagos island somewhere someday decided, you know what? I like the ridges on that shell right there, right? Instead of the smooth shell dudes over there. And so she went and mated with that guy, right? It can be something like that that influences the success of a trait. All right, so this is what Charles Darwin did. He collected all this data, made all these observations, then asked the questions, why are they different? And it is from his observations about this that the first, well, not the first, people have been bouncing around the idea of this before, but he actually nailed down what the theory of evolution would become. Okay? He wrote a book called On the Origin of Species. Have you heard of that? No? All right. Well, if you're interested in biology at all, you should definitely read it. Some of it is out of date, but a lot of it is still very valid observation. Okay? I like it so much, I have a leather-bound copy of it at my house. Fun fact, so I love collecting books. I don't know if I've told you all this before. I love collecting books. And the books that I love the most, I try and get in leather-bound and signed by the author if I can. It's an expensive hobby, so I can only usually afford to get one or two a year. But I do have the Harvard every now and then, the university will publish classic books in leather as collector's editions. They'll make them 200, 500, 800 at a time, depending. I got the second to last copy of the Harvard edition, Harvard leather edition of The Origin of Species 2 years ago now. And it's like, I'm proud of that. I have it on my shelf. Anyways, fantastic book. Highly recommend. All right, so this brings us to natural selection. What is natural selection? Someone said something about that earlier. When I say natural selection, everyone immediately thinks, what immediately came to your mind? Survival of the fittest, right? That's what everyone tends to think about. Survival of the fittest. However, what does fitness really mean?
Survival. Oh, sorry.
Survival of the survivals. There we go. Yeah. That's okay. When I say survival of the fittest, does that mean because I can jog for 10 miles and you can only jog for 5, I'm more likely to survive? I hate running, by the way, so you would probably beat me there, right? No, that's not what that means. Fitness means more than just how much you exercise. Biological definition of fitness actually means your success in proliferating both yourself and your species. So that includes, your general health, but also how successfully you reproduce, okay? I have 3 children. Biologically speaking, my fitness is higher than anyone who has 2 or 1 or none. Someone who has 4 children has biologically higher fitness than me, and so on and so forth. Why? Because I am proliferating the species at a more successful rate. Okay? So survival of the fittest doesn't just mean if I pit 2 animals together in a fight, which one survives. It means which group can reproduce more successfully. That's often what it comes down to, actually. We all love thinking about T-Rex and Spinosaurus duking it out, right? And there are movies that give us that interaction. But in reality, organisms that can survive ecological change through healthy fitness are more likely to win than to individuals or species that go to war with each other, right? That's usually how it happens in nature. The game is long. Now, natural selection, this happens naturally as a result of environmental stresses that make mutations either positive or negative, and those that have negative mutations will die off, and those that can acquire these random positive mutations will survive. There is, however, there are many examples of artificial selection. Dogs. How many of you have a dog or have ever owned a dog? What kind of dog do you have? Australian Shepherd. Those are beautiful. You have a dog? What kind of dog do you have? A Shih Tzu? What do you call a zoo that only has dogs in it? Sorry, I'm not going to. Claudia, do you have a dog? What kind of dog? A Yorkie. Okay. You have a dog?
Used to.
What is it? What was it?
Used to be a mix Jack Terrier.
Jack Terrier. Cool.
I used to have a Shar-Pei.
A Shar-Pei. Anyone else want to share? Yeah?
I have a poodle.
A poodle? Nice. Is it one of the big poodles? It's one of the little poodles. Okay. I had a combination beagle and why? It's been forever. How? Bless you. It's the Japanese dog.
Shiba Inu.
Huh?
Shiba?
Yeah, Shiba Inu. Okay? It was combination beagle Shiba Inu. Okay? So had the beagle colors and the floppy beagle ears, but the body was like the short kind of pudgy Japanese dog shape, right? Shiba Inu. And loved her. Had her for 12 years. But where do these dogs come from? These are not natural, my friends. All these different dog breeds, hundreds of dog breeds at this point, many of which we can actually mate with each other, they all come from the same source. Wolves. We made dogs artificially. They never would have happened without us. How do we live in a world where the same species contains poodles and mastiffs and greyhounds and the little teacup puppies, right, that fit in your handbag, and St. Bernards and all of these? Because we made that happen. How did we do that? Well, thousands of years ago, back when there were just wolves, the human and wolf relationship with each other was mostly we kill wolves to eat them, or wolves kill us and eat us. But at some point, perhaps after hunting and killing a wolf mother, humans came across wolf pups and decided, I wonder what it would be like to keep that instead of eat it, or just kill it, or leave it to die. And so that's what happened. And thus we get the first domesticated wolves. Now, as time goes on, and these wolves mate with each other and so on, some wolves are born with natural mutations of softer fur, mellower attitudes, smaller teeth. And humans start to think, you know what? These wolves with smaller teeth and mellower attitudes and softer fur are a lot nicer to keep around the house and around my kids. So I'm going to keep this one, and I'm going to not keep those other ones because I prefer this now. And so every time a wolf pup was born with a trait that was preferred, that wolf pup got more food. That wolf pup got more treatment. That wolf pup was more successful. That wolf pup, they actually tried to breed with other wolf pups that had similar traits. And here we see artificial selection take place. Nature, the environment and its interaction with the traits of an organism did not decide what a positive trait or a negative trait was. We did. And so dog breeds began. And you may have started off with wolfhounds and something like a husky and something like that. But then gradually as time goes on and different traits are bred into these populations, that's when you end up with something as crazy looking as a poodle or a teacup puppy. Have you seen those things? They're genuinely this big. It's crazy. If I put that up to a Great Dane and I said these are in the same species, yeah, that's what we did. And it's not just with dogs. You don't know it, but the chickens, the cows, the horses, every domesticated animal that we've got, we have bred the traits in that we like and eliminated the ones we don't. We kept the chicken traits, the genes that make the most eggs in the least amount of time, and eliminated the genes that might allow them to fly away from us. Right? You can go to different parts of the world and there are way crazier looking chickens than we've got here. If you ever go to Hawaii, there are chickens running everywhere. Go to Kauai or Maui or, bless you, the outskirts of Oahu where I used to live, right? Chickens everywhere, but you don't want to eat them. Chickens, those wild chickens look nothing like the domesticated chickens that we have today. There's actually a saying that we had in Hawaii. If you want to eat a Hawaiian chicken, you put it in a pot of boiling water with a rock, and when the rock is soft, the chicken will be ready to eat. Yeah, no one wants to eat those things. They're feral. They'll actually come after you. Okay? But we have made crazy, crazy changes to the natural development of these organisms. You could say that one of our greatest environmental impacts that we have had as a species is the artificial divergence of natural evolutionary traits. We've done that to so many things. Fish, farm animals, dogs, cats, reptiles. My snake is a fire leopard morph ball python from Africa. It is possible that that combination could have happened or may even have happened in the past in Africa in the wild. But he is the product of someone deciding, I'm going to breed this one with this one and see what happens. Right? Okay. Now, because the surviving offspring do not pass on, or because surviving offspring pass on their traits and the offspring that don't do not pass on their traits, this is how they proliferate through the population. Now, I don't want you to make the mistake of thinking that this adds up to a perfect animal or a perfect tree or whatever. There is at no point, as far as we can tell, through the progress of evolution, ever going to be a pinnacle organism. Evolution is not adding up to the perfect creature. It is simply a bunch of random changes that ended up being beneficial. They are not perfect changes. They only have to be good enough. Right? If, again, to come back to this room as an example, if I turn the temperature 50 degrees lower, what's the perfect solution to that? Maybe an electromagnetic field that retains all your heat and repels the cold. Are any of you going to have that like this? No. What are the only solutions we have? Put on the sweater. You'll live longer. It's a successful change. It's not the perfect solution, but it's good enough. And that's how adaptation works, which adds up to evolution through time. Okay? So, we have some things that we can see in ourselves and in other organisms that we refer to as vestigial. Vestigial means left over, okay, from a time when it was a successful trait, but is no longer anymore, and so is getting phased out. You know what that means? In our genetic code, there is still going to be a line of code that says, have this. It just doesn't turn on. Or it turns on and then stops. You know that tailbone we all have at the back of our butt right here on our pelvis? That's actually a tailbone. That's why we call it that. When we are being born, or not when we're being born, when we're being developed in our mother's wombs, a gene turns on that says grow a tail. It starts to do it. And then it shuts off because we don't need a tail to the success of this organism we've become. And so it stops. Other things like lizards and snakes and turtles and birds, that gene continues for a certain extent. Just in our species, it won't. Okay? So we still have all of the genes within our code of the things that we were, or that our ancestors had, I should say, in the past. But you know what we don't need? We don't need a human appendix. Not anymore. Appendix generates enzymes to help you break down raw meat. How many of you eat raw meat? Good. You shouldn't. It'll actually get you sick now because you know what? Our appendixes often don't work. And that's why we have problems like appendicitis. You know what appendicitis is? Your appendix, as an organ that is not used as a vestigial organ, becomes inflamed and is prone to burst. If it bursts, you're in trouble. Some people die from that. Quite a few people die from that. Which is why when you start having intense stomach pain, you should go see a doctor because that could be an inflamed appendix that's getting ready to burst and you don't want to die, right? So you go talk to a doctor and then they do an ultrasound and see if that's what's going on, okay? Wisdom teeth. How many of you have ever had your wisdom teeth out? How many of you have wisdom teeth at all? How many of you don't have any wisdom teeth?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't.
It's possible one or two of you don't. More and more people every generation do not have wisdom teeth. I actually had lunch 2 days ago with a friend who does not have and never has and never will have wisdom teeth. Okay? Wisdom teeth are at the very back of your jaw, and they were used for grinding down raw grains, okay? And seeds and the such. Back when we would eat, raw meat, sure, but also raw grains and seeds and nuts and that all the time. Extra grinding power. We don't need it anymore. As a matter of fact, our jaws have reduced because we no longer need the intense musculature to eat those things either. Because our jaw size has reduced, the wisdom teeth have started coming into a tighter space, which is why they will come in impacted. Some of you probably had your wisdom teeth out because they were impacted. That means they're coming in sideways. There's not enough room for them to come in the right way. Okay? Mine weren't impacted. I just needed them out so I could do some traveling for a while without health insurance, without needing a problem here. Okay? But we often get them out because they might be a potential issue. But we don't even need them anymore. That's why it's okay to take them out. And that's why they're becoming phased out in our bloodlines. Okay? Now, in 100,000 years when nobody has wisdom teeth, that's a trait that someone could switch on to grow wisdom teeth. But why would they do that, right? But my point is, it will still be in our genetic code. Okay? And then legs on snakes. Anacondas and boa constrictors and occasionally pythons will be born with little vestigial legs. They have little leg bones, little nubs coming off their body. They still have that gene, and occasionally it manifests itself. Okay, so what is evolution? Evolution is a change of inherited traits over time. Okay, through the generations and populations. Okay, a change in inherited traits. I am the product of billions of inherited traits from past generations going all the way back to bacteria. So is a tree, by the way. We share that common ancestor. But the tree has significantly different inherited traits than I've got, past a certain point. We share some, but not all. Definitely not all. Now, evolution, contrary to popular belief, does not seek to explain how life began. Okay? So this is something that a lot of people, in particular adamant religious people, have against evolution. Many people believe that evolution and the existence of a creative force like a God are mutually exclusive. I mean, I'm not going to talk much about that other than to say I haven't seen any evidence that that is the case. Because evolution is only seeking to explain how life changes, not how life began. Evolution cannot explain how life began. Because for life to change, it must have been there to begin with. So it's outside the bounds of evolution. Okay? Something to bear in mind there. It also does not include all biological changes. For example, I look very different now than I did when I was 8 years old. Right? I have a lot more hair on my face than I did when I was 8 years old. I only had a goatee back then. Why? Why have I experienced this biological change? And is it evolution? No. This has something to do with what we will often refer to as a biological clock. Okay? As we go through time, as our body progresses, it reaches stages of maturity. These are ontological changes. They have to do with the natural progression of our bodies through time. And it's different organism to organism. Crabs will shed their shells and grow new ones, as will snakes with their skin, with their scales. We don't do that as humans, but we grow hair all over our bodies, right? We get taller. Our hair gets white. We have these different responses to aging. This is not a product of evolutionary change. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to add on that. I don't think so. I think that should do it. So then let's talk about this. Evolution cannot reverse itself. Once a trait has occurred, it is there in your DNA. What color is my beard? Red? Reddish? What do you think? It's not as red as her shirt, but would you agree that it's red? Okay. Yeah, my beard is red, but my hair's black. Getting white, but it's black, right? My wife's hair is brown. My kid's hair is blonde. My dad's hair was black, and he had a black beard. Why do I have a red beard? None of my ancestors, as far back as I know, had red hair. Okay, there are recessive and dominant genes, and believe me, we will get to that here in a little bit. But I had a gene, which is the point. I had a gene for red hair, which manifested in me because it was there from some ancestor a long, long time ago. If a trait manifests itself, it cannot just disappear. It is always there. Dollo's law states that genetic changes cannot revert to former states. Even though a gene like I having red hair, me having red hair, manifests in me, I will not grow flippers. Okay? And all of us as a species will not grow flippers simply because we have a gene that says that we can do that. Or a gene that says that an ancestor once had flippers. Let me give you maybe an easier to understand example. If you think of a dinosaur toy like a T-Rex toy from the 90s versus a T-Rex toy now, can you think of any differences between those two? See how observant you all are. How many dinosaur toys you played with as kids?
They're a lot more mechanical.
I mean, sure, yeah, there's a lot more mechanical ones, but the way that they are portrayed, their appearance, a little more realistic looking, but what's another trait that they have that the older dinosaur toys did not? Feathers! You will often see T-Rex and Velociraptor and all of these other dinosaur toys with feathers on them now. And this is why, okay? It has to do with some reasoning due to Dollo's law. Birds today are descendants of those dinosaurs. Birds have feathers. We can see how birds had feathers all the way back to the time of the dinosaurs, right? Now, even though we haven't quite nailed down where the divergence of birds from the dinosaurs came from to the type of avian dinosaurs that they are now, we don't know exactly when that happened. We do know that feathers first showed up on certain dinosaurs in the Jurassic. So because we have feathers at point A and feathers at point B, we have to logically draw the conclusion, because of Dollo's law, that there were feathers on dinosaurs in between. Because feathers would not show up all the way in the Jurassic, disappear, and then show up again later on. That's not how evolution works. Evolution moves forward. It cannot move backwards, unless we do it, right? But we can violate Dollo's law artificially. In nature, Dollo's law exists. Evolution cannot reverse itself. Okay? So here we have an armadillo. How many of you guys have seen these dead on the highway? We're in Texas. These are dead on the highway a lot, right? Maybe not in our area, but you drive out west or down south and they'll be all over the place. Okay? This is what armadillos used to look like. Now, I know that I've got them kind of size comparison here, but you know how big an armadillo is. It's about that big, right? These ones were the size of SUVs. Yeah, that's a 2.5-ton armadillo. And that was only from, I want to say, 15, maybe 20 million years ago. They've changed quite a bit. At no point will our armadillos ever look like that again, unless we make them. Okay? I'll talk more about how we could do that. But in nature, that won't happen. Evolution has taken them here. Sloths. How many of you have ever seen a sloth in real life? They're kind of gross, but also super cute, right? Do you know why they move so slow? Why do sloths move so slow all the time?
Their diet.
Yes, their diet of? It's mainly leaves. It's a very fiber-rich, energy-low diet. Now, some organisms will adapt to eat more leaves so that they can move quicker. In the case of the sloths, though, for some reason, we still don't understand how they've lived this long, really. Their evolutionary change, their mutation was, I'm going to not eat as much as my buddies over there, so I'm going to move slower. Now, the only way that they've survived, as far as we can tell, is by staying in the treetops, away from most of the predators. Okay? That's where they tend to hang out, is high up in trees. But being able to move that slow, to have a much slower metabolism and not have to eat as much, is definitely a deviation from the normal course of eat more to have more energy to keep up your speed that we'd usually see. But this is what sloths used to look like. There was a skeleton of one of these giant ground sloths from the Pleistocene. These things only died out like 25, 30,000 years ago. Okay. There was at the museum I used to work at in Utah, there was a skeleton of one of these that was kind of sitting down, you know, kind of like this, with its hands up here like it was reaching for a tree. Its head was at the top of about the ceiling. So sitting down, sitting up, this sloth would have been floor to ceiling in this room. And believe me, they were not slow. These things had like claws, like this big, like giant banana-shaped claws. Okay? Probably could be pretty vicious. The sort of thing a grizzly bear wouldn't want to mess with. You know, let alone pretty much anything else. But now look at where they are now. Things changed. Mutations occurred. Okay? But this will never be that. Dollo's law. Now, there are two kind of general models for how you can look at evolution. There is your Darwinian model, which is also referred to as a gradualist model, which kind of states these changes are constantly ongoing through time. one little change here, a little change there. As time goes on, if I draw kind of a chart here, if I have time here and changes here, the Darwinian model states that it's always happening at a small but consistent rate. Okay? Then you've got the punctuational model, okay, which is changes happen in response to environmental occurrence. So you get something like this. Time goes by, nothing changes, and then all of a sudden you get some environmental change and boom, lots of changes all at once in response to that. Most scientists, including myself, these days, these are kind of the two classical viewpoints. Most scientists these days kind of think of it as a combination of the two. Punctuational Darwinism, something like this, where, yes, environmental change does, in fact, cause rapid speciation, rapid changes, new species diversity increases, organisms die off in response to massive environmental change. But there are processes of adaptation and evolution, new random mutations happening all the time in between those. So even though you and I are moving into a global warming period out of what once was a glacial maximum, for the last thousands of years, humanity hasn't simply stopped evolving. We are still experiencing random mutations. Okay? And now that we are moving into a much more different, a much warmer climate, there's going to be some pretty rapid changes that have to happen as we respond to that. Okay? So it looks something more like that. Like the worst staircase you've ever tried to walk down. Right? You'd slip and slide all over that thing. Any of y'all ever seen a human embryo? I was going to say, yeah, last Tuesday, right? Like, that's something we look at all the time. No, if you have not, let me show you. I'm going to show you a bunch of different embryos, actually, one of which is human. And I want you to notice how all of these animals start their growth in embryo exactly the same, or almost exactly the same. And as time goes on and more genes kick on to give them certain traits, they start to diverge from each other. But right off the bat, they share so many traits from our common ancestry, bless you, that they look essentially the same. Check this out. Fish, salamander, tortoise, chicken, human. Fish, amphibian, reptile, bird, mammal. Almost exactly the same. Very minor differences. Most of these organisms, if I were to take this and this and this and this and this and look at its DNA, their DNA at this point in time, their genetic profile would be almost exactly the same. Because only the traits that they have in common have been turned on. As more time goes on and our embryo develops more of the traits for that species will kick on, giving them distinct characteristics. Gills, back limbs, large back limbs, right? Tails that look more fishy, right? The different characteristics as time goes on will start to manifest. But up here, right at the beginning, or near the beginning, they look almost exactly the same because we share the same ancestry. And then down here, these are mature fetuses. But you can still see when you look at them, as we diverge, kind of think of this through time, the fish and the amphibian look a lot closer to each other than, say, the tortoise and the amphibian, right? The reptile and amphibian. But the reptile and the bird look more similar to each other than the human and the reptile. But the human and the bird look very similar to each other, so on and so forth. Okay? If ever you needed evidence of evolution from a common ancestor, look at embryonic development. How in the world do we look the same if we didn't come from the same source at some point? You know? All right. Then, let's talk about genetics. Any questions before we talk about genetics? Okay. Gregor Mendel is a man who we associate a lot of genetics research to, the early genetics research. Okay. In the 1800s, he did some experiments. He noticed that certain organisms will manifest certain traits that may not have been present in a parent. Okay. For example, me and my red hair. So he took pea plants. Why pea plants? There were lots of them, and they're very easy to breed. Okay. So he took a red plant and a white plant, a pea plant with red flowers, I should say, and a pea plant with white flowers. And he very specifically picked ones that had a long record of only red flowers and a long record of only white flowers. Okay, as far back as people could recall with these certain plants. Okay, then he put them together and he pollinated them with each other, and the offspring gave only red flowers. Okay, interesting. So he bred that one with a red plant. And you know what he found? The offspring from that gave red and white flowers. What does this tell you? Well, what it told him was that there is something in all living things that transfers individual to individual, but retains something of the parent. It is not possible for white flowers to occur in this third generation when the second generation only had red flowers, unless something from this first generation carried through to here. And this he called genes. We call them genes today. Okay? Genes essentially you can think of as traits that have been preserved from the parent that gave them to you. You have inherited them from that parent. Maybe it's your eye color, maybe it's your hair, maybe it's your body shape, maybe it's how tall you are. But all of these are genes that we get from our ancestors. Maybe some of you look more like a grandparent than you do your parents. That's the same thing. Okay? So just to revisit, a mutation is any change that occurs to your DNA. Commonly, these mutations are the result of radiation absorption by a DNA strand. Okay? That change goes on to the offspring that come from you after the fact, after the change. I could have experienced a mutation at any point that would give my child two heads. I mean, very unlikely, but possible. It would not manifest unless I had a child after that mutation occurred. And this is why you'll see examples like my nephew who came and visited us a few weeks back, right? And he had two thumbs on his right hand. It's a mutation. We know how to manipulate these genes on our own without needing to wait for nature to do it. And what this means is, because we know how to do it artificially, we can slap Dolo's Law in the face and say, forget you. We know how to turn on specific genes that have been turned off for a very long time. We use things called Hox genes. H-O-X. Hox genes are the little timekeepers in your body that determine, while it's being grown, when to turn on certain genes and when to turn the other ones off. So while you are growing in your mother's womb, at some point, Hox genes are going to say, start growing hair on the head, and they're going to turn on the correct genes for that. How long? How quick? What color? then they're going to turn those off. They're going to turn on genes that say start growing fingernails, and then they'll turn those off or slow it down. They're going to turn on genes that say grow muscles in the head, grow a tongue. Hox genes control all of the development of traits in an embryo. And we have figured out how to use chemical impulses to turn on Hox genes. And since we know how to turn on Hox genes, we can direct them towards whichever gene we want to grow. Okay? This is what gives us the ability to make animals that look like this. This is a chicken embryo. What do you notice that's different about it?
The eyes.
Huh?
The eyes?
The eyes are actually, that's how big embryonic chicken eyes actually are.
Teeth.
This chicken has teeth. And the beginnings of a tail that will be much longer. And claws on its fingers. This is essentially a chicken dinosaur. Had this been able to hatch, it would be a little 2-foot chicken velociraptor running around. We know how to make this happen. This is a real picture. This happens all the time. Matter of fact, with the right equipment, you can do this for $40,000 in your garage. It's currently internationally illegal to create new organisms like this without special prerogative. For example, that company Colossal that just made the direwolf. We had a conversation about the direwolf, right? Yeah, about how it's not actually a direwolf. It's a gray wolf that they genetically modified with a few traits that the gray wolves have in common with a direwolf, right? As close as we'll probably ever get, but not the original direwolf back from the dead, okay? You'll never get a true dinosaur back, right? We'll probably never even get anything that looks like a dinosaur as well as they do in Jurassic Park. But we absolutely have the ability to give bird embryos dinosaur traits like teeth and claws and body size and things like that. They just might look more like a bird than the ones in Jurassic Park do. Okay? I guarantee, even though this is illegal, I guarantee there's at least one place, Russia, China, Montana, somewhere in Australia, someone's got a farm of little chicken dinosaurs running around just because they can. You know it's true. It's got to be true. We've got how many billions of people in this world, and at least some of them are idiots, right? Someone with enough money has done this. The policy surrounding these sort of things is rapidly changing. It's very possible that within the next decade, making organisms like this could be legal, and labs across the country will be doing it. It's very possible. Things, policy, science, it all goes at a rate that's almost too difficult to keep up with. So, let's talk about species for a second here. I've used the word species quite a bit. What determines whether a species is different from other organisms? Well, the biggest factor is called a reproductive barrier. That is, can two organisms mate with each other and have a successful offspring? What's their fitness like together? Okay. What makes a successful offspring? One that can, in turn, go on and breed and send its genes down the line, right? So there are some animals that can actually mate with each other, but not have any successful offspring. You guys ever heard of a liger? A liger is what you get when you breed a lion with a tiger. Yes. You can have a baby born from that. It's called a liger. However, ligers are sterile. Ligers cannot in turn have children, which means that lions and tigers, even though they can technically mate with each other, remain in different species because you cannot continue the species or the genetic line from that mating. Yes?
Why are they sterile?
Because of their genes are too different. When the genes of two different organisms are too different from each other, then the genes don't really align well. Ligers often are also subject to disease. They often are, I believe they're also albinos. There's just a whole bunch of genetic things that comes with the package that would keep them from being a successful offspring. You will see them in zoos occasionally, though. Mules. Mules are the offspring of donkeys and horses. Mules are sterile. So donkeys and horses remain in different species. Speciation is when we have the development of a new species, and there are a couple of ways this can happen. There may be a genetic or a random mutation that causes a genetic barrier to fall. It is very possible that at some point there could be a genetic mutation in a tiger that allows that tiger's mating with a lion to produce successful offspring. And then that liger would be able to reproduce, and then we would have a new species of liger, separate from the original species of both lions and tigers. Okay? So speciation is the development of new species through time as traits change. And those traits get spread through a gene pool. Here's another way that that can happen. It's called genetic drift. Imagine I experienced a mutation, or I keep using myself as an example. Let's say that some kid somewhere is born with a third eye. And this third eye can see in the dark. That's a fairly useful mutation. Let's say that it's a much more useful mutation, okay, than you actually thinking it is. Let's say that it's the greatest mutation ever. It's awesome. This kid is cool. Everyone loves this kid. He grows up. He's got kids. Those kids have third eyes that can see in the dark. It's a wildly successful mutation for one reason or another. As time goes on, it spreads through the gene pool, right? So let's say 10 generations from now, there are 100,000 people with third eyes. 10 generations after that, there's 500 million. 10 generations after that, everyone in the world might have third eyes. And at that point, it's just part of the gene pool. It's part of the general human population, right? Would we still call that population human? If I said humans have 3 eyes, your mind immediately goes, no, we don't. Right? Interesting question. There's no reproductive barrier to having a third eye, other than maybe you don't want to mate with someone who has 3 eyes if you have 2. Right? So technically we would still be humans, but what if this mutation affected our ability to reproduce with each other? Right? All of a sudden, that's a different story. And if that's a successful mutation, then all of a sudden, there are 2 different species of humans, neither of which can breed successfully with the other. This happens in nature all the time. That's how we get different species of cat. That's how we get different species of rat and mouse and all of these things, okay? There have been different species of human in the past. We're just the one that beat the rest. We'll talk more about that later on. Believe me, we'll talk about that in Module 3. But this is called genetic drift. So the changes percolate through a population, and as these changes isolate or create a difference with the original population, you get a new species as a result. Okay? Okay, so why do we get new species? What causes the speciation? Let's go back to our conversation about the Galapagos Islands. What was the big deal in the Galapagos Islands? What caused these different forms of finches and different forms of tortoise to show up? Huh?
The environment.
Environment did what?
Different things being in the islands. So between the islands there was differences.
Yeah, there were different environments present on each island. There was a different set of circumstances, okay? Isolation. Isolation in distinct environments caused these different groups on the Galapagos Islands to look so different from each other. Here's another example, the island of Palau. This is to the east of the Philippines, okay? North of Indonesia, east of the Philippines. Right here. The island of Palau is essentially a giant coral reef complex that has been above the surface of the ocean since the last glacial maximum. Why? Because the glaciers pulled enough water out of the oceans that the ocean levels dropped, exposing the coral reef. Now, when this happened, anything that was living in that coral reef suddenly, not suddenly, it happened over time, but you know what I'm talking about, geologically speaking, suddenly, were isolated from each other in lagoons like this. The water level was up here, and then it dropped as time went on. And so anything that was in there stayed in there. Anything that was in there stayed in there. Most of these are cut off from the ocean, from each other, giving you isolated pools within which any number of mutations could be beneficial. What if this pool had a certain predator, but that one didn't? What if this pool gets less sunlight than that one? What if the natural runoff from rain goes more into this one than it does this one? So this one's slightly saltier than that one. Any number of environmental changes could be true here, which means that the mutations are going to be different, differently positive or negative, pool by pool. And so one species of jellyfish that got trapped in all of these different lagoons as time went on, as thousands of years passed, and now each lagoon has a species of jellyfish distinct from the others, each of which had to respond to different environmental stimuli through random mutations that percolated through those populations. This population looks so different from that one because it went through 100 different genetic mutations separate from that one, and they've never been able to mingle and see which of those mutations would be the most beneficial and take over the population as a whole. Okay? There are some trends that we see in evolution. In general, evolution seems to favor larger body size. Examples of this. Can any of you think of examples of larger body size happening through time? Whales. Yep. Can you think of any animals that got bigger through time?
Bears.
Bears. Mammals in general, right? We haven't talked about this so much yet. During the time of the dinosaurs, mammals were pretty much just rat-sized, rat-like creatures that lived underground and came out nocturnally to hunt while the dinosaurs were asleep. Here we are now. We've got elephants and whales and us. Dinosaurs themselves started off as tiny little reptile-looking dudes. And look how big they got. 80-ton monstrosities walking around the planet. Each step feeling like an earthquake. Right? Bugs got really big. Oh, we'll talk about the big bugs. Trees. Right? In general, evolution seems to favor larger body size. Why? Without looking at this. Or you can look at this, but we can discuss it. Give me a reason why evolution would seem to favor larger body size. It's okay to pick one of the examples on the screen. Let's get a discussion going.
More strength, like more muscle mass.
Strength, muscle mass, harder to take down by a predator, right? It's harder for a predator to take down an 80-ton sauropod, right? True. What are some of the cons? Like, what would come with larger body size? Yeah, sure, I'm a walking tank. But what is the cost of that? Metabolism. Those larger dinosaurs had to eat constantly. Maybe you've seen larger animals today, elephants, horses. They're eating all the time. To be a gigantic 120-foot long, 80-ton sauropod, you had to eat plants all day long. Okay? Got to keep that body fed to sustain that body, to sustain that muscle mass, to not be taken down by a predator. Okay? There is an upper limit, by the way, on how big animals can get. Have you guys been watching those Godzilla movies, Godzilla and King Kong movies that have been coming out? What do they call that? That's the Monsterverse, right?
Yeah, when they say there's a hollow Earth underneath Earth.
Mm-hmm. Yep, the ones with the hollow Earth theory. Ridiculous. But I hate to break hearts here, if any of you are Godzilla fans. It is physically impossible for anything to be that big. This is why. Math. Enough said. Right? No. Math and physics. To maintain, to hold up, to fight gravity, to sustain and stand, you need to have a certain cross-section of bone. Okay? Past a certain point, the amount of cross-section you need becomes exponential. So the largest limb bone of the largest dinosaur that ever lived, I have touched. And I was able to almost wrap my arm around it. Okay, it came to about here. That's how thick this bone was. Okay, I could almost, it was about there, almost a foot difference between my fingertips. Okay, massive, massive animal. Okay, past that point, mathematically speaking, doing this through models, every time that you increase by about 10 feet in height, you would have to double the bone width of the limbs needed to sustain that animal and fight gravity. Which means that for Godzilla to exist, I'm going to do a really bad Godzilla drawing. Right? And then there's his tail. Here's his legs, right? They show Godzilla legs as kind of looking like that, right? Maybe a little bit thicker right there. To actually have something the size of Godzilla, his legs would need to look like that. It's like sumo Godzilla.
There was a version of him that had legs similar to that.
I'm sure it wasn't that popular. That doesn't look like a great monster, right?
It wasn't a great show.
Right. So it's like, sorry, it's just not going to happen, right?
So would King Kong be able to exist then?
King Kong also is too big. If you made, okay, so the King Kong in the new movies, first of all, they're really inconsistent with how big he is. You ever notice that? In one movie, like, he's standing on the Empire State Building, right? And he's like holding on, and he's maybe 10 stories tall. And he's getting shot at by airplanes, and they're hurting him. And then in the next movie, he's as tall as Godzilla. You know, he's picking up the Empire State Building to use it like a hammer. They're really inconsistent.
You should see 2014 Godzilla.
Oh, I have. Believe me, I have. So I'm making fun of those movies right now. I am a huge fan of beat 'em up monster robot schlock. Right? Throw all those movies at me. Give me that Pacific Rim. Give me that Godzilla and King Kong. I eat that up. I love watching it. But I'll make fun of it like nobody's business. Okay? The scientist me is like, oh, that's ridiculous. But then the lizard brain in my head is going, oh, this is awesome. Right? Okay. We already talked about punctuational versus gradual. This is kind of the progression in mammal evolution that gave us whales. Okay? Whales were these almost a foot long rat-looking creatures only 50 million years before today. Okay? And now we've got, well, this is actually a Basilosaurus. This is a, not a Basilosaurus. It's, I forget what this one's called. But a gigantic whale animal that existed a long time ago. They died out a couple million years ago, 5 or 6 million years ago, I believe. But from them, we get our actual modern whales today. That didn't take that long. And it only took 12 million years to get bats. So to get from those rat-like animals, 12 million years later, we had bats. They were flying. That is so fast, evolutionarily speaking. That is definitely rapid diversification, rapid speciation in response to environmental stimuli, not just slow mutations through time. It's examples like that that really give evidence to the punctuational part of that evolutionary model. Evolutionary convergence is when you can see niches being occupied by similar organisms. You remember what I described a niche as? Who can remember my example of a niche? I described an ecosystem as an apartment building. Do you remember this? Where each niche is an apartment in that building, occupied by an organism. Whenever there is an extinction, apartments are left vacant. It's like New York or San Francisco. No apartment is going to be vacant for long, right? Heck, it's like here, right? It's hard to find a reasonably priced apartment because they all get snagged like this. But that apartment gets filled very quickly by something that may have lived in another apartment. Maybe, let's dive into this example a little bit more, okay? The grandma that has her children and grandchildren living with her in apartment A, as soon as apartment B opens up, she's going to send her kids over to apartment B to live there. Bless you, right? And all of a sudden, you have two apartments occupied, two different niches occupied, and the second niche is occupied by something that changed, that evolved from the first one. So what this means is, I've got niches everywhere on our planet, and every niche on every continent is filled by some organism. Certain niches favor certain organismal traits. For example, the wolf in North America fills a certain niche. That same niche in Australia was occupied by the Tasmanian wolf before it went extinct. Look at the similarities. Australia, North America. Also, by the way, totally different types of mammals. Placental, marsupial. Regardless of the type of mammal, regardless of the continent or location on the planet, the same niche favors similar body types. Flying squirrel, North America. Flying phalanger, Australia. Anteater, marsupial anteater. Mole, marsupial mole. Vastly different and long separated evolutionary paths. Australia hasn't been connected to North America since before the dinosaurs were extinct. Long before then, actually. Okay? And yet, look at how similar the animals that occupy the same niches on these separate continents are. Different evolutionary histories, different genetic profiles, all mammals, true, but long separated from each other. And they still end up looking the same because niches favor certain body types. Check this out. The niche that is occupied by our dolphins in the ocean today used to be occupied by a type of swimming reptile called an ichthyosaur. Do you see the similarities? Yeah. Before the ichthyosaur, it was occupied by an apex predator called a Dunkleosteus. This is a fish, an armored fish. Do you see the similarities? Variations on a theme is what we're looking at here. Let's talk about extinctions for a little bit. An extinction is when a large group of organisms dies out, goes away, no longer exists, present only in the fossil record. We can see it in the fossil record as a cutoff, no more past that point. Okay? A lot of people didn't actually think extinctions were real. They thought that there's no way, that couldn't happen, right? There's absolutely no way so many things on our planet could die off like that. About the mid to late 18th century is when people started taking that sort of thing very seriously. Okay? Now, what causes an extinction? An environmental change so rapid or so intense that a lot of organisms cannot survive. They cannot adapt fast enough. Maybe an asteroid impact. Maybe a series of violent volcanic eruptions. Maybe the rapid onset of climate change, global warming, or ice age, either way. Maybe it was disease or a brand new mutation in a predator that the prey just couldn't keep up with. Whatever the case may be, we see extinctions throughout the geologic record. Here we see the number of genera, which remember is the plural for genus, okay, which is the step above species, okay? And then through time, this is just through the Triassic to Cretaceous. We see rapid diversification, extinction, rapid diversification, massive extinction at the end of the Triassic. Diversification, extinction, 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 massive extinction, extinction, massive diversification in the Cretaceous, extinction, and then massive extinction. This is the extinction that killed the dinosaurs and a lot of other things on the planet. Okay? Also, not the biggest. Okay, we'll talk about the different extinctions in Module 3 specifically. So, when you get a species that disappears, not through extinction, not through some sort of environmental change, but rather because they were outcompeted, maybe they were phased out by speciation from them, right? Like if eventually two-eyed humans disappeared and three-eyed humans were all that was left, not because we were killed, not because we were wiped out by an asteroid, not because the three-eyed ones ate us, right? It would just be because eventually the three-eyed gene spread through the population and the two-eyed gene was just phased out, okay? That's called a pseudo-extinction, okay? It's not, it's not due to an environmental factor. Most of the time it's just because the old kind couldn't breed with the new kind. And so they just kind of disappeared over time. Mass extinctions are what we call these events that occur between these geologic time periods, okay? So you can see where the worst ones are often where we will put the geological time boundaries. So like right here at the Ordovician-Silurian boundary, massive extinction. There's one near the Devonian Carboniferous boundary, okay? We don't put that there for a reason we'll talk about later. The Carboniferous Permian boundary though, massive extinction there. The Permian Triassic, massive extinction there, the largest that ever happened. We'll talk about that. Triassic Jurassic, Jurassic Cretaceous, Cretaceous Cenozoic, and you can't really see it right here. I'll draw this in exaggeration, okay? We're actually in an extinction right now, an ongoing extinction. due to various climate shifts that have happened over time, but also now due to our efforts. There is a massive extinction ongoing at the moment because, well, we're removing a lot of habitat, chopping down a lot of forests, building a lot of grassland, diverting a lot of waterways, polluting a lot of ocean, acidification of the ocean. We're doing a lot of things that contribute to habitat loss, okay, beyond just putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere like people generally think about, okay. Overhunting, we have wiped out innumerable species of not only animals, but plants and insect, okay. This happens naturally as, the climate will shift on its own. We've done a substantial amount of it. And then, of course, there's the industrial contributions as well, like the pollutants in the atmosphere and in the ocean. So we are actually in the middle of what some people call a mass extinction. I don't think it has progressed to the point that we can really call it a mass extinction. Most of the literature calls it that. I'm not convinced we can call it a mass one yet. It's heading there. I think we still call it an ongoing extinction, and then we can refer to it as mass extinction when we know what the full impact has been. Any questions? Yeah.
About the radiation thing with the genes.
Yes.
You seen the animals around Chernobyl? How they're kind of different.
Yes. So if any of you are familiar with the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, there was a meltdown of the reactor. They lost containment. A lot of radiation was sent out. This was in Ukraine, by the way. And the only way that they were able to contain it was by flying dozens of airplanes over the reactor and dumping concrete on top of it, basically. Okay? It is still, however, a massive catastrophe zone. They do not let people back in there to the city to live. It's still highly irradiated. As a matter of fact, during the first year of the Russia-Ukraine war, Putin made the brilliant choice to march part of his army through Chernobyl to try and take the city. And they went through the forest that had become irradiated. And they stirred up so much radioactive dust and breathed it in that it's very likely all of those soldiers are currently dying or will die shortly of substantial radioactive exposure. Interestingly enough, they are not releasing the information about those soldiers, last I looked, probably because they're starting to see that happen. One of the many highly intelligent choices that he made and his military leaders made, but I won't talk about that anymore anyway. But one of the results is a lot of the living things in that area died off, but the things that didn't are experiencing rapid mutations. Do you have any examples that you wanted to mention?
There was a goat picture I saw where it had like 3 eyes. His mouth was like all wolf.
Yeah, a lot of the mutations are going to be negative. Think about what happens if, here's an example. What if I told an AI to come up with 100 dad jokes? How many of those would actually be good? Some, definitely not all, right? What if I told an AI, which has no sense of taste, to invent 100 recipes for chocolate cherry pie or something like that? Okay? Some of it might be good. A lot of the combinations it might come up with would probably suck. Okay? Or be repetitive. Or just leave us, that was all right. The more mutations that you throw, the statistical amount of them that are going to be good don't necessarily get more. Okay? Your likelihood that you're going to make a mutation that is either negative or doesn't make a difference is pretty high. So if I put an animal in a highly radioactive zone, the animal is most likely going to die. And if it doesn't, it most likely is going to experience mutations that won't do much good for that animal. And if it does experience any positive mutations, it might also experience a mutation that could kill it. So yeah, goats are having some weird stuff. The worms and the insects are experiencing some weird changes, but also a lot of them are dead or dying. Yeah.
I heard of a mold that was discovered that absorbs radiation.
Mole? Yeah. That would be a very useful trait for a mole to have, the ability to absorb radiation like that. Why? Well, because moles spend all their time underground. Where does most radiation come from? Subterranean isotopes. Moles and other burrowing animals are more likely than any other animals on our planet to experience constant radiation. So having a mutation that allows it to process those radioactive elements and expel them somehow, very useful. It probably has something to do with its thyroid, I would imagine. I imagine moles do have a thyroid. I have to look into that. With humans, we
Mold. Like,
Oh, mold! Oh, I heard mole. It would make sense for moles to have radioactive exposure, like I just said. Mold, though. Mold doesn't, I mean, I feel like most molds are resistant to a lot of environmental factors. There are molds, most molds that I can think of, you can dry them out, keep them from water for a long time, and then as soon as you get them wet, they come back to life again. Radioactive resistance, though, that's not something I've thought about. Bombard anything with enough radiation and it'll die. That is interesting. What else? All right. Well, then let's call it a day.